Yeah, let's cue up this video, this TYT video. This was a pretty interesting debate over the recent Supreme Court decision, which basically criminalized homelessness. This was absolutely wild. And Cenk here is, acting super dense about what the actual issue is. So let's take a look here. And Cenk kind of gets low-key destroyed by his co-host. So this is pretty interesting, guys.
To law enforcement. This tactic has consistently failed to reduce homelessness in the past, and it'll assuredly fail to reduce homelessness in the future. We might disagree, but Cenk, I'm curious what you make of this decision.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what to make of it because on the one hand, and I'm really curious what you guys think, because on the one hand, I think like Eighth Amendment, really, like the argument from the liberal justices is that it's cruel and unusual punishment. That's usually reserved for torture. So it's torture to say you can't sleep in the park?
Can we pause it?
I don't know that it is, okay?
The Eighth Amendment, we can read it for Cenk. I thought he was cooking for a second. It's like watching a dude ride a bike and then they fall over. He was like, the Eighth Amendment, it protects against cruel and unusual punishment. But sleeping outside isn't torture. And it's like, read that one more time. What does it protect against, Cenk? Oh, cruel and unusual punishment, Gavin. We're Americans, right, Chad? We're a slice of America, right? Working class people, fine folks. I think it's pretty cruel and unusual to throw a homeless guy in jail for being homeless. What would you say? Would you say that qualifies and constitutes as cruel and unusual? I would too.
The implication, I guess, of this ruling is just that like you can be homeless as long as you don't fall asleep. So just keep wandering around all day, every day, never falling asleep. Like, how is that not a form of torture? Sleep deprivation is literally a form of torture. So I just don't understand if you're criminalizing the act of falling asleep in a public place. Like, there's not some park where you can go fall asleep if you're homeless. It's not like they have one park for homeless people and then one public park for non-homeless people. And
which
all the
I
homeless
also
people are
ride
just
with.
What was that?
I also wouldn't get down with that.
Yeah, obviously. Of course not.
Put all the poors there in that park. Fuck that park.
Yeah, that would just be like District 9 or some shit. But anyway, let's keep going.
And then if the cops can't move out homeless folks from any public area, does that mean we have to cede all of our public parks to homeless people, cede all of our public areas, and that's it? The public areas are now only for homeless people because that's what's going to happen. So, and it's not their fault.
I don't want to be rude, but does Cenk know what the word public means? Does anybody, chat, you want to pull up a dictionary? Public means for who? The people of America. This is a weird effort to dehumanize, to otherize homeless people. So it's like they either get to have our parks or we get to have our parks. Also, shout out to Salisa. Salisa's a real one on this exact same wavelength as me. Yeah. Anyway.
Also, it's like no one's denying that if you show up to a public park and it's full of homeless people, like no one's denying that that's a societal issue. But the difference is that in our eyes, the societal issue is that all those people don't have homes, not that all the park goers have to observe the reality of this country, which is the massive houselessness crisis. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the fucking problem. The problem is not the inconvenience it causes for people like Cenk Uygur and Anna Kasparian. And although that's undeniably a side effect, I mean, no one likes to be reminded of the horrific reality of the country that we live in and the failed fucking state and the lack of a social safety net. That's not a nice thing to be reminded of. But being reminded of it isn't the issue. The issue is the fact that so many people don't have a goddamn house. And to sit here and fearmonger about, not being able to go to your public park without seeing a homeless person, instead of sitting here and, screaming on behalf of the homeless people and crying out on behalf of the people who literally don't have a fucking house. Like, that's crazy. And it absolutely is state sanctioned or state-sponsored violence. Homelessness is a form of violence. It can be taken care of. The government could provide homes. They're choosing not to. And yeah, of course you're going to experience violence as a side effect of homelessness. What about when it's over 100 fucking degrees outside and you don't have any water? What about when it's negative 10 degrees and you don't have a fucking blanket? You don't think that's a form of violence?
Dehumanization. You can't go to the fucking bathroom.
Yeah, exactly.
I bet Cenk doesn't want to see people fucking homeless going to the bathroom at the fucking wherever the fuck I almost said Walmart. Cenk's not going into a fucking Walmart, this piece of shit, right?
Yeah. Anyway, let's let the hosts, educate Cenk here, because they do a pretty good job too, the co-hosts.
I'm not like a weirdo right winger who like hates homeless people. I have great sympathy for them, right?
As long as they don't have
and I want to help them. And I think that some portions of the left think, oh, just leaving them out in the street is helping them because of freedom. I don't believe that at all.
Literally nobody has ever said that.
I would do involuntary, confinement, not confinement to like imprison them, but to help them, to get them some mental health if they.
I didn't know Matt Walsh was hosting the Young Turks now. This is insane. This is insanity. This is Daily Wire talking points. He's literally just talking about rounding up and throwing in prison homeless or unhoused people, the poor. Like, it's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
I don't even know what to add to that other than the fact that this guy's not a progressive. He's not your friend. He's literally making Tucker Carlson, Fox News kind of.
Well, the only thing I would support, and I believe that California actually did have this up until fairly recently, and I'd be interested in your opinion. I'm not an expert in the law or anything, but it seems like a more reasonable solution than just straight up criminalizing homelessness, which obviously is horrifically dehumanizing. What I will say I've heard has been an effective solution before is when you are arrested for a drug crime in California, they would offer you instead of facing the jail time or the criminal punishment, you could choose to seek to go to the rehab center and be treated for drug addiction. And that actually was apparently pretty effective at helping people recover. But it wasn't like they were just rounding up homeless people for the crime of being homeless. It was like once they had committed an offense, a drug-related offense, they had an option to get treatment instead of paying the fine or doing the time or whatever. And I think that's more of a humanistic approach, but just straight up criminalizing homelessness and being like, if you fall asleep on a fucking bench, then you're going to jail. Like, that's completely ridiculous and completely fucking fascist.
Let's just round up and kill the poor. Everybody who doesn't have at least 150 racks in their bank account, I'm sorry, but you're being rounded up and shot. We're all gonna get it. And Cenk thinks that's for the best. What's crazy, guys? I'll tell you, every single person listening to this podcast is probably closer to being a homeless person than being in Cenk's financial situation. So let's just put that in perspective when you hear him talk about people.
Yeah,
like that.
so out of touch.
If they need the mental health treatment, if they've got an addiction issue, help them with addiction. I don't know why the two options are: we beat the living crap out of them and stuff them in dungeons, or we don't do anything and we just let them die in the streets and the public parks.
Those aren't
that gets to the overall issue. But in terms of this, just real question to both of you guys. Let's start with Mondale. Mondale, if the liberal justices are right here, does that mean that we can't stop homeless folks from taking over parks and that's it? All the parks are help me understand it.
I think what happens with the Eighth Amendment argument is the torture part is sleep is a necessity, and I think that's why she started with that. So to tell the people that are homeless or without houses that they cannot sleep is torture, and we know that using people sleep depravity is something that people use in torture. So I get that argument, and for me, I really do think that it is torture simply because we have the capacity to end homelessness immediately. Not like 10 years from now, we can actually end it right now, just like we could with poverty if we were serious about it. So I think a government, and in this case, the city government is not trying to do anything to address homelessness because the only shelter is ran by a Christian facility that requires you to be a Christian basically to attend. So that government is not trying to address the homeless problem.
And that's the other thing about the Supreme Court ruling. It was in this specific town where the city wasn't even providing city services to homeless folks. The only place they could go was a religious organization that had a measly amount of beds and that forced you to attend their bullshit, religious services or ceremonies or whatever to even be allowed in the first place. But yeah, the city was not offering them beds. It's not like these homeless people were just deciding to sleep in the streets or the parks instead of the beds they were being offered, which of course, has its own issues. And obviously those places aren't always safe or actually a good place to stay, even if you are homeless anyway. That's a whole separate conversation, but that's not even what was happening. There literally was no beds for the homeless folks in this town to sleep in, which is why the cops just started fucking arresting them. And that's what Cenk's defending here. Thankfully, this dude, I think his name is Mondale or something, was here to set the record straight. And that's basically the state of TYT these days, you guys. You'll be lucky to tune in, and you'll be lucky if it's like the one day a month they have on someone based like this to push back and actually check Cenk and Anna on their bullshit propaganda segments. Because you can better fucking believe if Anna had been the co-host here instead of these two based guys, that it would have just been a straight up Fox News light propaganda segment.
Which is crazy that's how far the Young Turks has fallen, that it's only the guests or the fringes of the network who are able to actually make a progressive case to their audience, and really, really depressing.
Yep. Luckily, as I said, not only this dude, but the other guy also sets the record straight.
They have. So that is cruel. And if the city had a bunch of empty beds that they were providing this homeless population, then I would say, okay, I understand what you're saying. Go to one of these bedding facilities and sleep there. But that's not an option. So you're telling these people you cannot sleep. You can be homeless as long as you're walking around or sitting up with your eyes open. And that to me is torture.
I don't know, Jordan, like if I'm homeless and the Christian folks are gonna take me in and they say, like, even if they said to me, you gotta say Jesus is awesome, I'd be like, Jesus is awesome because he's providing me a bed. So I like.
That's such bullshit. Also,
you tell me, brother, okay, what am I missing?
It's so easy for you to say that when you have shit, right? When you have your whole life. But for some people, for one, you shouldn't have to do that because we have freedom of religion in this country. So you shouldn't have to subject yourself to that kind of indoctrination just in order to be a free person in this society. So it goes back to, it's a constitutional issue. We have like fucking 4 rights in this country, and I'm going to die to fucking keep them, even if I'm the only person that gives a fuck about that, right? And the idea that you would have to like fucking submit yourself to some Christian fucking evangelical organization in order to like get sleep, one of the most fundamentally necessities of existing, one of the 3 things you just cannot fucking live without. It's like air. You have to fucking have it, water, food, all that shit. Okay. So pretty ridiculous right there. But how about the fact that some people who are unhoused, it's not just like, oh, tomorrow I'll get my new job and then I'll be back and I'll be Cenk Uygur's financially. No, this is a lifelong fucking problem. There's steps to build. And so what you're saying is that, oh Cenk, don't worry. All you have to do is you debase yourself, humiliate yourself. You believe in nothing as much as, like, say you're like really religious, right? And you're like super Jewish or you're super Islamic or you're really Baha'i, I don't know, right? Like fucking you got your religion and it's really important to you, and all you have is that shit because you're at rock bottom. You're unhoused. You're fighting the elements every single night. You're fucking hurting. Your body's sore. You're alone. All you have is that shit. And now you're being told that in America, a supposedly free country, you have to submit to some fucking Christianity that you don't want anything to fucking do with. Otherwise, you're a criminal. Otherwise, you're going to have to torture yourself because it's illegal to sleep in public. You got to hightail it out to somewhere in the fucking woods where you can't be seen or heard from for anybody to catch a couple of Z's. Does that sound humane? Does that sound like a fucking country you want to be a part of? And to people who are going to be in the chat talking about like, ooh, not that we have many bad people on the chat. This is an imaginary Republican response, but it's not fucking crazy to build public housing. It has been done all throughout history. And if you look at, Gavin, you've been to Europe. I never have. Architecture is pretty beautiful there, right? Some of it's shitty. If you go the Eastern Bloc, right? The Ruskies, unfortunately, architecture is not your fort, right? Just like cooking, right? You guys make that borscht shit. I'm like, oh, yeah. Fuck, never going. Hey, you had it down for a while. St. Petersburg Basilica looks nice in pictures, but I don't know if I'll ever venture over to those sticks. Anyway, a lot of public housing in Europe, right? Especially in the EU. And it looks pretty nice. I've seen pictures of it and articles about it in Jacobin. It's not something that's impossible to do. It's not impossible to make it a community good. Do you know what is good for the community? Having doctors, lawyers, mechanics, grocery store guys, restaurateurs, all living on the same block with a slightly different socioeconomic background. But the mixed income communities, that creates a vibrant area for people to live. You become friends with people from all different backgrounds. You look after one another. Oh yeah, my kid is out here. Oh, I'll keep an eye on him while you run to the fucking grocery store. That's community. That's what we crave in our society that we miss, right? And we've isolated ourselves so much. We've made everybody struggle so much just to put shelter over their fucking heads. And then now you're going to take them one step further, and it's like, oh yeah, you either run on this fucking hamster wheel, and if you fall off, if you get bruised up, and you don't have immediate family that could take you in and shelter you, then you're going to fucking jail. Yeah. What the fuck is the point of abolishing debtors prison? I mean, this is like 150-year regression. This is bullshit.
Yeah, and just what's with this entire fucking analysis, this reactionary garbage on
You're missing
TYT that we're reacting to, at least from Cenk, right? There's no discussion of why we're here, how society got to this place, how the homelessness crisis has exploded to the extent that it has. Cenk's not advocating for rent control. He's not talking about the fact that apartments that cost $900 or $800 to rent a month before COVID now cost $1,500. How the fuck are people supposed to pay for that? Meanwhile, wages continue to stagnate. We're always told that, if we raise the minimum wage, well, it's going to cause inflation. Well, guess what? Inflation happened fucking anyway, and wages are still the goddamn same. The minimum wage hasn't gone up. People could literally work full time and still find themselves facing homelessness because you basically have to cohabitate with someone in order to afford a roommate. If you want to have an apartment that's not a total piece of shit, a mold infested piece of rundown garbage that's not close to where you actually need to be to work. So can we get at least some analysis in that regard? Like, what the fuck is the point of having a news show, let alone a progressive news show, if you're just going to sit here with your bougie ass fucking co-host, Anna Kasparian, and bitch about how you can't go to the public park without seeing a homeless person anymore? If you're not providing some solution, if you're not actually, embedding or inserting some level of progressive analysis into this conversation, I just don't get even what the point is anymore. If you're just going to have these dudes explain everything to you, what is your ideology, Cenk, other than being a reactionary?
Yeah. I think at this point that is his ideology. It's the NIMBY liberalism with the, wanting to feel woke and, feel like you want what's best for society when really you just want a stable reality and what's best for you.
Yeah. Anyway, let's watch just a bit more of this, guys, before we wrap this thing up.
Efficient, that there weren't enough beds even at that one facility. So to go back to your earlier point, and I think Mondale said it best, within Sotomayor's dissent, of course, sleep deprivation is a form of torture, but it's not that the torture is that they can't sleep in the park like you framed it. I think the premise, your setup was wrong. It's that you're punishing people who already have one of the most miserable existences in this country. And it is a purely avoidable circumstance. The remedy is not letting them sleep in the park, and it's not about freedom. Gorsuch, in his opinion, framed it that way, and I think it's totally disingenuous. No one's saying it's their freedom to sleep out there. It's that we shouldn't be punishing people. We shouldn't be doing encampment sweeps with the cops. The problem is that we're responding to a public health problem and a problem where social services are needed with policing. And you see this in cities who just across the board funnel billions of dollars, hundreds of millions or billions of dollars into their police departments and say, okay, go fix every problem. Well, LA is doing it slightly different now, and I don't think this is the best example. I have a better example, but Karen Bass wanted to put more money into addressing the homelessness problem in this country, in this city. Just this week, we saw a report in the Los Angeles Times. Homelessness went down by 10.4% since last year, with an increased investment in addressing that in the city of Los Angeles. It was just in the Times 2 days ago. In Denver, 800 people who are experiencing homelessness were given universal basic income. By the 10-month mark, 45% of people who were in that program, in that study, found permanent housing, and the city saved $589,000 that would have been spent by the city to treat people, to put them in jail, to provide ambulances if they had a medical emergency, need to go to the hospital. It is more cost effective to take care of people, even just to give them a universal basic income so they can get their own housing.
And that's a point I love too, because there's obviously all these myths about homeless people and how if you give them money or give them help, they're just gonna, further destroy their own lives. They're gonna go out and buy a bunch of drugs or just go to the liquor store and spend their whole check there, whatever. The reality is most homeless people don't actually want to be homeless, but they're in a situation where they feel like they would have to dig themselves so far out of a hole that it's basically impossible. So they resign themselves to misery, right? Because they're so in debt, or their situation has just become so fucked that they can't even imagine climbing up out of that pit, like I said, which is hard to imagine for some people to be in that place, but it's easier to get there than you might think. So yeah, if you just literally, for the most part, give people the ability to get themselves back on their feet, they'll take the opportunity and they'll be fucking damn grateful for it. Obviously, of course, there will of course be a percentage of people who are either too addicted or too mentally incapacitated, and that might need an intervention of another variety. I'm not a fucking public health expert or a policy person necessarily, but I think it's beautiful that experiment showed with the UBI that a significant portion of homeless people, if even just given money, will do the responsible things. They want to get back on their feet. They want to have a healthy life. They want safety, security. They don't want to be a fucking public menace. Of course not. This is obvious.
It just also goes to show that we're not doing the best we can to solve this or alleviate this problem. If we actually had concerns about solving this problem, it's kind of like the crisis in the Middle East. What we're concerned about is how do we keep the status quo going and functioning the way we want, and how do we keep these people out of our fucking eyesight, line of vision, excuse me, right? I want them not in my backyard. Oh, I don't hate homeless people. I want them to be treated in the jail, Oh, I know, yeah. Sorry, don't go to jail, right? Should have worked harder in high school, brother. Oh, just like stupid shit like that, where they're like simultaneously saying that, like, oh, I don't hate homeless people, and then talking about them in such a way where it shows that you've radically dehumanized them in your brain. You don't see them as somebody who's like you. You've otherized them, right? You don't just have any human empathy in your fucking heart for somebody who's going through a horrible ass situation. Obviously that they did not want to be a part of, and of course we know already, as Gavin pointed out, that people will work hard if you give them an opportunity to fucking get their life together, and it actually saves the city money. It saves the government money. Shocker, right? Because we spend so much money on policing. We spend so much money on the carceral state. And what do? They suggest you just further incarcerate. They suggest that you further criminalize. That's not going to work. We have the most incarcerated society per capita. How do you, in the same breath, call yourself the freest society? It's bullshit.
Yeah. Can't
do it.
If we were going to, incarcerate our way out of this issue, then America would be the cleanest, safest place in the world. Yeah, because that's been our solution this entire time. It's just more money to cops, more money to criminalizing addiction, desperation, homelessness. Instead of doing a goddamn thing about it, just get it out of sight, out of mind, so the rest of the privileged people can pretend like it's not happening. But again, you can't just do that over and over again, unless you're just going to put these people in jail permanently, which is obviously not an option. Because guess what? If you're already homeless and they put you in jail for 30 days, what the fuck do you think is going to happen after those 30 days? You're going to go back to being homeless. They don't set you up with a fucking job interview at the end of your sentence. They don't give you a fucking, cushy gig. Of course not. And also, someone in the chat made the great point that, like, what if you're an elderly homeless person? Good luck fucking finding a job if you're like in your 70s or 80s and you're experiencing homelessness.
People who are in their late 50s often have really hard time finding work.
Yeah, it's crazy. So it's ridiculous to have this analysis. Cenk Uygur continues to disgust me on the issue of homeless people specifically.